The Murder Castle, H. Holmes, America's first serial killer, 1890s. The year was 1893, and Chicago was a city ablaze with ambition. The world's Columbian Exposition, a grand celebration of human progress, drew millions to its gleaming white city, a marvel of architecture and innovation. Electric lights dazzled the night, and the world's first Ferris wheel spun dreams into the sky. But beyond the fair's radiant glow, in the heart of the city's Englewood neighborhood, a darker force was taking shape. A man with piercing blue eyes and a charming smile was building something sinister, a structure that would soon be known as the Murder Castle. This is the story of H. Holmes, America's first documented serial killer, and the house of horrors that became his deadly playground. Chicago in the 1890s was a city of contrasts. It was a place where fortunes were made and lost in the blink of an eye, where immigrants and dreamers flocked to chase the promise of a better life. Factories churned out smoke, and the streets buzzed with the clatter of horse-drawn carriages and the shouts of vendors. The city was growing faster than it could contain, its population swelling to over 1 million souls. Amid this chaos, opportunity thrived, not just for the honest, but for those with darker intentions. H. Holmes saw Chicago as a canvas for his twisted desires, a place where people could vanish without a trace, swallowed by the city's relentless pulse. Born as Herman Webster Mudgett in 1861 in Gilmanton, New Hampshire, Holmes was no stranger to deception. Even as a child, there was something unsettling about him. Neighbors whispered of his cold intelligence, his ability to charm anyone while hiding a calculating mind. By the time he arrived in Chicago in 1886, he had already reinvented himself. No longer Herman Mudgett, he was now Dr. Henry Howard Holmes, a man of sophistication and ambition. With a medical degree from the University of Michigan, earned through questionable means, he presented himself as a respectable pharmacist and entrepreneur. But beneath the polished exterior lurked a predator, one who saw the city's anonymity as the perfect cover for his crimes. Holmes settled in Englewood, a bustling suburb south of Chicago's Loop. It was here, on the corner of 63rd and Wallace Streets, that he began to lay the foundation for his empire of evil. The lot he purchased was unremarkable at first glance, but Holmes had grand plans. He envisioned a building that would serve as both a business and a trap, a hotel to lure unsuspecting victims, designed with secrets only he would know. The World's Fair was coming, and with it, a flood of visitors who would need a place to stay. Holmes knew this was his moment. He would build a castle, not of dreams, but of nightmares. As construction began, locals took notice. The 3-story building was an oddity, with its mix of architectural styles and imposing presence. It was a labyrinth of over 100 rooms, with hallways that twisted and turned in disorienting ways. Shop fronts lined the ground floor, giving the appearance of a respectable business venture. But those who worked on the project, carpenters, masons, and laborers, whispered of strange requests. Holmes demanded soundproof rooms, hidden passages, and doors that locked from the outside. He hired and fired workers frequently, ensuring no one saw the full scope of his design. To the outside world, it was just a peculiar building. To Holmes, it was a machine for murder. The city was too busy to pay much attention. The fair was the talk of the nation, and Englewood was close enough to attract those seeking affordable lodging. Holmes played his part perfectly, charming neighbors and customers alike. His pharmacy, housed on the ground floor, became a local staple. Women, in particular, were drawn to his charisma, his soft voice promising remedies and care. But some noticed how people who entered his building didn't always leave. A guest would check in, their luggage carried up the creaking stairs, and then, nothing. No one thought much of it at first. People came and went in Chicago. It was just the way of the city. Yet, as the castle neared completion, a sense of unease began to settle over the neighborhood. Deliverymen spoke of strange smells emanating from the basement. Tenants reported hearing faint cries in the night, dismissed as the wind or their imagination. Holmes, ever the manipulator, had an answer for everything. A smile, a laugh, a plausible explanation. He was a man who could talk his way out of anything, and for now, his secrets were safe. The World's Fair was about to begin, and with it, a flood of victims would walk right into his trap. If you're fascinated by cases like this, Make sure to hit subscribe and join us here at the Crime O'Clock, where every case is a ticking mystery waiting to be solved. Stay with us as we unravel the chilling story of H. Holmes and his murder castle, a tale that will leave you questioning just how well you know the person standing next to you. Before the murder castle became a name synonymous with terror, its architect was a man shaped by ambition, cunning, and a darkness that seemed to grow with every passing year. H. Holmes, born Herman Webster Mudgett, was not a product of Chicago's chaos alone. His descent into monstrosity began long before he set foot in the city, rooted in a childhood that hinted at the horrors to come. To understand the man who built a house of death, we must first peel back the layers of his past, tracing the steps that turned a boy from a small New Hampshire town into America's first serial killer. Herman Mudgett grew up in Gilmanton, a quiet, rural community where life revolved around church, family, and hard work. But even as a child, he stood apart. His intelligence was undeniable. Teachers marveled at his quick mind, his ability to memorize facts and charm adults with ease. Yet, there were signs of something unsettling. Classmates recalled his fascination with dead animals, how he would dissect them in secret, studying subdued curiosity they mistook for scientific interest. He was bullied, they said, but Herman never seemed to mind. He would smile through the taunts, his blue eyes glinting with a strange, private amusement. By his teens, the charm had become a mask. Herman married young, at 17, to Clara Lovering, a decision that seemed more strategic than romantic. He craved respectability, a way to climb the social ladder. But marriage couldn't contain his restlessness. He left Gilmanton for medical school in Michigan, where his darker impulses began to surface. Fellow students noticed his knack for acquiring cadavers under dubious circumstances, selling them for profit. Rumors swirled that he had tampered with life insurance policies, staging accidents to collect payouts. Nothing was ever proven, but the whispers followed him like shadows. When he arrived in Chicago in 1886, Herman Mudgett was ready to shed his past entirely. He adopted the name Henry Howard Holmes, a nod to his new persona as a sophisticated doctor and businessman. The city was the perfect stage for his reinvention. Chicago's rapid growth and transient population offered endless opportunities for a man with his talents: forgery, fraud, and manipulation. Holmes quickly established himself in Englewood, taking over a pharmacy and earning the trust of the community. His smooth voice and impeccable manners disarmed even the most skeptical. Women, in particular, found him irresistible, a fact he would exploit time and again. But beneath the surface, Holmes was already experimenting with his crimes. He started small, swindling suppliers, defaulting on loans, and disappearing before anyone could catch him. His early schemes were financial, but they revealed a chilling lack of empathy. He viewed people as tools, means to an end. A business partner who questioned him might vanish, leaving behind a forged signature on a contract. A creditor might receive a charming apology and a promise of payment that never came. Holmes was a chameleon, adapting to every situation, always one step ahead. His medical background gave him a unique advantage. He understood anatomy, chemicals, and the art of disposing of bodies. In Michigan, he had learned how to strip flesh from bone, how to dissolve evidence in acid. These skills, meant to serve science, became the foundation of his murderous craft. By the time he began planning his castle in Englewood, Holmes was no longer a petty conman. He was evolving into something far more dangerous, a predator who saw the World's Fair as a buffet of potential victims. The fair was a magnet for the unsuspecting. Young women, in particular, flocked to Chicago, seeking work or adventure. Many were alone, far from home, with no one to notice if they disappeared. Holmes recognized this vulnerability and began to refine his methods. He practiced his charm on employees, tenants, and customers, perfecting the persona of the trustworthy doctor. But those who got too close, lovers, business associates, curious neighbors, began to sense something off. A fleeting coldness in his eyes, a lie that didn't quite add up. Most dismissed it, unable to believe such a polished man could be capable of evil. As Holmes laid the groundwork for his castle, he was also building a network of accomplices, though few knew the full extent of his plans. He hired architects and builders, paying them well, but keeping them in the dark. He forged documents, secured loans under false names, and amassed the funds to bring his vision to life. The castle was not just a building. It was an extension of his mind, a maze of control, secrecy, and death. Every brick, every hidden door, was a piece of his growing obsession with power. In the heart of Englewood, where the hum of Chicago's growth was loudest, a strange edifice began to take shape. By 1892, H.H. Holmes' vision was becoming reality. A three-story building that stood out against the modest homes and shops of 63rd and Wallace Streets. To the casual observer, it was an ambitious project, a mix of commercial promise and residential utility. But to those who worked on its construction, it was a puzzle of contradictions, a structure that seemed to defy logic. This was the murder castle, a labyrinth designed not for living, but for killing. As the World's Fair loomed, Holmes' creation was nearing completion, ready to welcome its first unsuspecting victims. The castle was a marvel of deception from the start. Holmes had purchased the lot with borrowed money, using aliases and forged documents to secure loans he had no intention of repaying. The ground floor housed a pharmacy, relocated from a nearby site, its shelves stocked with remedies that drew in customers. Above it, the second and third floors were a maze of over 100 rooms, some grand, others claustrophobic, connected by hallways that twisted and turned without reason. To the public, it was advertised as a hotel, a convenient stop for fairgoers seeking affordable lodging. But its true purpose was far darker. Holmes was meticulous in his planning. He oversaw every detail, from the placement of walls to the installation of gas lines. He demanded features that baffled workers: soundproof rooms lined with asbestos, doors with hidden locks, and staircases that led nowhere. A massive brick furnace was built in the basement, far larger than needed for heating. Chutes ran from upper floors to the cellar, wide enough to carry more than just laundry. Gas jets were installed in certain rooms, controllable from Holmes' private office. Workers whispered about these oddities, but Holmes was quick to explain them away: ventilation, privacy, modern conveniences. His charm was his greatest weapon, disarming suspicion with a smile. To ensure his secrets remained hidden, Holmes employed a revolving door of laborers. No single worker stayed long enough to grasp the full design. He hired carpenters for a week, masons for a day, firing them before they could ask too many questions. When one contractor grew curious about a sealed room, Holmes paid him off and sent him away. Another who noticed the strange chutes was told they were for waste disposal. The constant turnover kept the project fragmented, its true nature known only to its creator. By the time construction was complete, the castle was a fortress of misdirection, a place where people could enter and never be seen again. The pharmacy on the ground floor was the castle's public face, a beacon of respectability. Holmes worked the counter himself, dispensing tonics and advice with a doctor's confidence. He hired young women as clerks, their presence adding to the shop's appeal. Customers, especially women, trusted him implicitly. He had a way of making them feel special, his piercing eyes holding theirs just a moment too long. But some noticed how clerks seemed to come and go. A girl would work for a few weeks, then vanish, replaced by another eager face. Holmes always had an explanation. She moved away, she got married, she returned home. No one pressed him further. Upstairs, the hotel rooms were a mix of luxury and strangeness. Some were furnished elegantly, with plush beds and ornate mirrors, perfect for luring wealthy guests. Others were bare, with iron walls and no windows, more like cells than accommodations. Hidden passages allowed Holmes to move unseen, watching his guests through peepholes. Trapdoors led to secret rooms where he could store whatever he needed to store. The basement was the castle's dark heart, housing not only the furnace but a dissecting table, vats of acid, and a pit filled with quicklime. It was a laboratory for disposal, designed to erase all traces of those who entered. As the World's Fair opened in May 1893, the castle was ready. Chicago was flooded with visitors, men seeking business, families seeking wonder, and countless young women seeking independence. Many were drawn to Englewood, where lodging was cheaper than in the city center. Holmes placed advertisements in newspapers, offering rooms at reasonable rates. His charm and the castle's proximity to the fair made it an attractive choice. Guests arrived with suitcases and dreams, unaware they were stepping into a trap. Holmes greeted them warmly, his smile hiding the calculations of a predator. The neighborhood, caught up in the fair's excitement, paid little attention to the castle's peculiarities. The streets were alive with visitors, and the promise of prosperity drowned out any unease. Yet, some locals began to notice oddities: a faint chemical smell from the basement, a guest who checked in but never checked out. Holmes was always there to deflect, his explanations as smooth as ever. The fair was in full swing, and the castle was open for business. Its doors were wide, inviting the world in. But what lay inside was a nightmare waiting to unfold. The World's Fair of 1893 was in full swing, and Chicago pulsed with the energy of a city on display. Visitors from across the globe marveled at the white city's grandeur, unaware that just a few miles away, a different kind of spectacle was unfolding. Holmes' murder castle stood ready, its doors open to the flood of strangers seeking a place to rest. But for those who stepped inside, the charming Dr. Holmes was spinning a web of deception so intricate, so calculated, that few would escape its threads. His charm was a weapon, his lies a currency, and the castle his perfect stage for a deadly performance. Holmes was a master manipulator, a man who could read people as easily as a book. He knew exactly how to draw them in. To the weary traveler, he was a gracious host, offering clean rooms and a warm smile at a price that undercut the city's overpriced hotels. To the young women who came to Chicago seeking work, he was a gentleman employer, promising jobs as clerks or typists in his bustling pharmacy. To his business partners, he was a visionary, spinning tales of wealth and opportunity. But every word, every gesture, was a step toward entrapment. Holmes didn't just want their money or their trust, he wanted their lives. The castle's guests were a diverse lot, but Holmes had a type. He targeted those least likely to be missed: single women, drifters, people far from home. The fair brought them in droves: young women from small towns, lured by the promise of independence, or widows with modest savings, drawn by the spectacle. Holmes greeted them with practiced ease, his deep voice soothing, his eyes locking onto theirs with an intensity that felt personal. He'd carry their bags, show them to their rooms, and promise to check in later. Many never saw the outside of the castle again. His methods were chillingly efficient. Some guests were lured to the soundproof rooms on the second floor, where gas jets could fill the air with poison at the turn of a valve. Others were invited to his office for a late-night drink, unaware that the wine was laced with sedatives. Once unconscious, victims were carried through hidden passages to the basement, where Holmes' true work began. The chutes made disposal easy, sliding bodies to the cellar's furnace or acid vats. He was meticulous, stripping flesh from bone, sometimes selling skeletons to medical schools for extra profit. To him, every victim was a transaction, their lives reduced to a ledger entry. Holmes' charm extended beyond his victims to those who might suspect him. When a guest's family inquired about a missing loved one, he was ready with a story. She left for a job in New York, he'd say, or she eloped with a suitor. His pharmacy clerks, often young women he seduced, were particularly vulnerable. He'd woo them with promises of love or marriage, only to dispose of them when they became inconvenient. One such clerk, Emmeline Sigrand, was a bright, beautiful woman from Indiana. Holmes hired her in 1892, and she quickly fell under his spell. Customers saw them laughing together, but by early 1893, Emmeline was gone. Holmes claimed she'd married and moved away. No one questioned it, at least, not yet. His financial schemes were as bold as his murders. Holmes took out loans to furnish the castle, then sold the furniture before payments were due. He insured the building under multiple aliases, planning to burn it down for the payout if needed. When creditors came knocking, he'd charm them with partial payments or disappear entirely, leaving forged documents in his wake. His confidence was staggering. He once convinced a supplier to deliver goods worth thousands, only to vanish with the merchandise. The chaos of Chicago's growth made it easy to hide. People were too busy chasing their own dreams to notice his trail of lies. The castle itself was a partner in his crimes. Its maze-like design ensured no one could navigate it without his guidance. Guests who wandered too far found themselves in dead-end hallways or locked rooms. Hidden panels allowed Holmes to watch, to listen, to choose his moment. The furnace roared at odd hours, its smoke blending with the city's industrial haze. Neighbors noticed, But Englewood was a place of constant noise and movement. A missing person was just another face in a city of millions. Yet, cracks were beginning to show. A delivery man mentioned a strange odor from the basement, like chemicals mixed with something fouler. A tenant complained of hearing footsteps in walls where no one should be. Holmes dismissed it all with a laugh, but the whispers were growing louder. The fair was at its peak, and the castle was busier than ever. Holmes was thriving, his web of deception tighter than ever. But every web has a breaking point, and his was closer than he knew. The summer of 1893 was a whirlwind in Chicago, with the World's Fair drawing crowds that filled the streets with laughter and awe. But in the shadow of the fair's glittering white city, H. Holmes' murder castle was a silent predator, its halls swallowing lives with chilling efficiency. Guests checked in with smiles, their suitcases heavy with hope, but many would never check out. The city was too distracted to notice, and Holmes was too clever to leave a trail. Yet, as the bodies piled up in his basement, the first threads of his carefully woven web began to fray. The vanishing guests were starting to leave echoes. Holmes' hotel was a revolving door of faces, each one a potential mark. He targeted the vulnerable, young women traveling alone, men with no local ties, anyone whose absence wouldn't raise alarms. His advertisements promised cheap rooms and a safe haven, and the proximity to the fair made the castle irresistible. A family might stay for a night, charmed by the doctor's hospitality, unaware that he was sizing them up. If they had no connections, no one to miss them, they were perfect. Holmes would offer a tour of the castle, leading them through its maze-like halls, his voice calm and reassuring. For some, that tour was their last. The castle's design was his greatest ally. Certain rooms were death traps, rigged with gas lines that could be activated from Holmes' office. A guest might retire for the night, only to fall into a drugged sleep as gas hissed through hidden vents. Others were lured to the basement under false pretenses, a business deal, a private consultation, where a chloroform-soaked rag or a swift blow ended their lives. Holmes was meticulous, disposing of bodies in the furnace or dissolving them in acid vats. He kept souvenirs sometimes, a watch, a ring, a lock of hair, but the rest was erased, reduced to ash or liquid that drained into Chicago's sewers. One such victim was Minnie Williams, a young heiress from Texas who arrived in Chicago in 1893. Minnie was naive, trusting, and wealthy, exactly the kind of person Holmes preyed on. He hired her as a stenographer, showering her with attention and promises of a future together. Minnie, smitten, moved into the castle, bringing her sister Annie with her. Holmes saw an opportunity in their inheritance, forging documents to transfer their assets to himself. Within weeks, both sisters vanished. He told neighbors they'd gone to Europe, but their luggage remained in the castle, untouched. No one asked questions. The fair was too grand, the city too busy. Holmes' confidence grew with each kill. He was untouchable, a ghost in his own domain. The castle's soundproof walls muffled screams, and its hidden passages let him move like a specter. He began to take risks, targeting not just strangers but those closer to him. Julia Smythe, a pharmacy clerk and one of his lovers, became a liability when she got pregnant. Holmes promised to marry her, but instead, he lured her to the basement for a procedure. She was never seen again. Her young daughter, Pearl, disappeared soon after. Holmes claimed they'd moved away, but their belongings stayed behind, gathering dust. The castle's dark rhythm was relentless. A guest would arrive, their names scrawled in the register. Holmes would study them, deciding their fate. Some were spared, their stay uneventful, a cover to maintain appearances. Others were chosen, drugged, gassed, or bludgeoned. The furnace roared at night, its smoke blending with the city's haze. The acid vats bubbled, the quicklime pit hissed. Holmes was a machine, his murders as calculated as his scams. He sold skeletons to medical schools, pocketing cash for bones he'd stripped himself. Every death was a profit, every victim a means to an end. But the vanishings were starting to pile up. A boarder noticed a trunk left behind in a room, its owner gone without a word. A delivery man remarked on the stench from the basement, sharper than the usual chemical tang. Neighbors began to talk, their unease growing. Holmes was quick to deflect, offering stories of sudden departures or family emergencies. His charm held firm. but the sheer number of missing people was becoming harder to ignore. A woman's shawl left on a staircase, a man's hat forgotten in the lobby. These were small clues, but they were mounting. The fair was winding down, and Chicago's frenzy was beginning to slow. Holmes knew his window was closing. He pushed harder, taking more risks, inviting more guests. The castle was a ticking clock, each body bringing him closer to discovery. But he was addicted to the thrill, the power of deciding who lived and who died. The city was still blind to his crimes, but the whispers were growing louder, and someone, somewhere, was starting to listen. If you're gripped by the horror of Holmes' vanishing guests, hit subscribe and join us at the Crime O'Clock, where every case is a ticking mystery waiting to be solved. The castle's secrets are piling up, but how long can they stay buried? Stay with us to find out. As the World's Fair of 1893 began to fade from Chicago's memory, the city settled into a quieter rhythm. The crowds thinned, the white city's lights dimmed, and Englewood returned to its everyday hum. But within the walls of H.H. Holmes' murder castle, the air was thick with secrets. The vanishings had not gone unnoticed, and though Holmes' charm had kept suspicion at bay, the whispers were growing louder. Neighbors, tenants, and even passers-by began to sense something wrong, a feeling that the castle held more than just rooms for rent. The walls themselves seemed to murmur, hinting at the horrors hidden within. The castle was a fortress of silence, its soundproof rooms designed to swallow screams. Yet, some sounds escaped. A tenant on the second floor, a young seamstress named Clara, spoke of hearing faint cries at night, muffled as if coming from deep within the building. She dismissed it as her imagination, but the unease lingered. Another boarder, a traveling salesman, noticed a strange warmth near certain walls, as if a fire burned constantly below. He mentioned it to Holmes, who laughed it off, blaming an overactive furnace. The salesman moved out soon after, unsettled by the doctor's too-perfect smile. Locals began to piece together a pattern. The pharmacy clerks, always young and pretty, seemed to vanish with alarming frequency. Emmeline Sigrand, Minnie Williams, Julia Smythe, names that lingered in conversations, their absences unexplained. Neighbors recalled seeing these women laughing with Holmes, only to disappear days later. Their stories were the same. They'd left for a better job, a new life, a sudden marriage. But their belongings, dresses, books, a favorite brooch, remained in the castle, untouched. Holmes' explanations were starting to wear thin, like a script recited one too many times. The basement was the source of the darkest rumors. Deliverymen who brought supplies to the pharmacy refused to linger near the cellar door. One swore he'd smelled something rancid, like rotting meat mixed with chemicals. Another claimed he'd seen Holmes carrying a heavy sack downstairs at midnight, his face pale but composed. The furnace roared at odd hours, its smoke curling into the night sky. A local boy, dared by friends to sneak a peek, glimpsed barrels of acid and strange tools through a cracked window. He ran home, terrified, telling his mother the castle was haunted. She hushed him, but the story spread. Holmes was aware of the growing scrutiny. He doubled down on his charm, hosting small gatherings at the pharmacy to maintain his image as a respectable businessman. He'd pour drinks, tell stories, and laugh with neighbors, his blue eyes sparkling with warmth. But those who looked closer noticed his hands, always moving, fidgeting, as if eager to be elsewhere. He began to spend more time in his private office, where he controlled the castle's hidden mechanisms. From there, he could lock doors, release gas, or watch through peepholes, ensuring no one stumbled onto his secrets. Yet, the castle itself was betraying him. A tenant found a hidden panel in her room, revealing a narrow passage. She never spoke of it to Holmes, fearing his reaction, but she confided in a friend. Another guest, a curious journalist staying at the castle during the fair, sketched its confusing layout in his notebook, noting staircases that led to blank walls. He left Chicago before pursuing it further, but his notes would later resurface. Even the furnace, Holmes' faithful accomplice, was drawing attention. A neighbor complained to the city about the smoke, prompting a brief inspection. Holmes paid off the official, but the visit rattled him. The families of the missing were starting to ask questions. Letters arrived at the castle, inquiring about daughters, sisters, friends. Holmes responded with forged replies, mimicking handwriting or claiming the person had moved on. But not everyone was convinced. A brother of one missing woman, Emmeline Sigrand, traveled from Indiana to Chicago, demanding answers. Holmes met him with a somber face, spinning a tale of Emmeline's happy marriage and sudden move to London. The brother left, unconvinced but with no proof to challenge the story. His visit, though, stirred the neighborhood's unease. Englewood was no longer the oblivious backdrop it had been during the fair. The castle's oddities, its smells, its sounds, its endless stream of fleeting guests, were becoming impossible to ignore. Holmes sensed the shift. He began to plan his exit, diverting funds to new schemes in other cities. But he wasn't ready to abandon his castle just yet. The thrill of his crimes, the power of playing God, was too intoxicating. He continued to lure victims, even as the whispers grew into a chorus. Someone was bound to listen, and when they did, the walls of the murder castle would finally speak. By late 1893, the World's Fair had ended, and Chicago was catching its breath. The murder castle, however, remained a dark enigma. The whispers about missing guests and strange smells had grown into a quiet roar, and H.H. Holmes' carefully crafted facade was beginning to crack. The city's relentless pace had shielded him for a time, but the web of deception was unraveling. A tenacious detective, a suspicious insurance company, and a trail of missing people were converging on the castle. The investigation into America's first serial killer was about to begin, and Holmes was running out of lies. It started with a man named Frank Geyer, a seasoned Philadelphia detective with a reputation for dogged persistence. Geyer had been tracking a separate case, a string of insurance frauds tied to a man named Howard Pittizel. The trail led to Chicago, where Pittizel's business partner turned out to be none other than H.H. Holmes. Pittizel had vanished, and his family was frantic. Geyer's instincts told him something was wrong, and when he learned of Holmes' history of shady dealings, he dug deeper. The name of the Englewood Castle kept coming up, along with stories of people who entered but never left. Holmes had been careful, but not careful enough. The insurance fraud case centered on Benjamin Pittizel, a loyal associate who had helped Holmes with his schemes. Holmes had taken out a 10,000 life insurance policy on Pittizel, claiming he died in a lab accident in Philadelphia. But the body was suspicious, badly burned, almost unrecognizable. Geyer, working with Chicago police, traced the policy to Holmes and began investigating his past. They uncovered a string of aliases, unpaid debts, and missing associates. The castle, with its odd reputation, became a focal point. Geyer arrived in Englewood in 1894, armed with questions. He interviewed neighbors, who spoke of the castle's strange layout and the doctor's charming but slippery demeanor. A former tenant mentioned the basement's chemical stench. Another recalled a locked room she was forbidden to enter. Geyer's search of the castle was hampered by Holmes' absence. He had fled Chicago, sensing the heat, but the detective found enough to raise alarms. A hidden staircase, a sealed vault, and a furnace littered with ash and bone fragments painted a grim picture. The police began to suspect murder, but the scale was unimaginable. The investigation widened when Geyer tracked down letters from families of missing women. Emmeline Sigrand's brother provided a photograph and a description of her time at the castle. Minnie Williams' family sent desperate pleas, mentioning her inheritance and Holmes' promises of marriage. The list grew: Julia Smythe, Pearl, and others, all last seen with Holmes. Geyer's team searched the castle more thoroughly, uncovering hidden rooms and gas pipes rigged to release poison. The basement revealed horrors: a dissecting table, vats of acid, and a quicklime pit. The evidence was mounting, but Holmes was a ghost, slipping through their grasp. Holmes had fled to Fort Worth, Texas, then to St. Louis, using aliases to start new scams. But his luck was running out. A botched horse swindle in Missouri led to his arrest in November 1894. Geyer was notified and traveled to question him. Holmes was calm, spinning tales of innocent business deals and sudden departures. But Geyer wasn't fooled. He pressed Holmes about Pittizel, whose death was now suspected to be murder. Holmes stuck to his story, but the detective found inconsistencies, dates that didn't match, witnesses who saw Holmes with Pittizel just before his accident. The investigation turned to the missing Pittizel children, 3 of Benjamin's children, entrusted to Holmes after their father's death. Their mother, Carrie, was hysterical, claiming Holmes had taken them to safety. Geyer's search for the children became a cross-country manhunt, tracing Holmes' movements through hotels and train stations. In Toronto, a shallow grave yielded the bodies of two Pittsville girls, Alice and Nellie. A boy, Howard, was later found dead in Indiana. The discoveries shocked the nation, and Holmes' name became infamous. The castle was no longer just a strange building. It was a house of horrors. Back in Chicago, police tore apart the castle, finding more evidence: bloodstains, personal items, and a hidden vault with scorch marks. The press caught wind of the story, and headlines screamed of a murder hotel. Public fascination grew, but so did outrage. How had this happened in the heart of Chicago? Geyer's investigation was meticulous, piecing together Holmes' financial scams and the vanishings. The detective estimated dozens of victims, though the exact number was unclear. The castle's secrets were spilling out, and Holmes was cornered. The arrest of H. Holmes in November 1894 sent shockwaves through Chicago and beyond. The man who had once charmed his way through Englewood's streets was now in custody, his web of lies collapsing under the weight of Detective Frank Geyer's relentless pursuit. The murder castle, once a silent accomplice, was yielding its secrets, each discovery more horrifying than the last. As investigators tore through its walls, the true scale of Holmes' atrocities began to emerge, painting a portrait of a killer whose depravity knew no bounds. The nation watched, horrified and captivated, as the horror of the castle was laid bare. Geyer's investigation had already uncovered the tragic fates of the Pittsville children, their small bodies found in shallow graves far from Chicago. But the castle itself held the key to understanding the full extent of Holmes' crimes. Police and detectives descended on 63rd and Wallace, armed with crowbars and lanterns, determined to uncover every secret. What they found was beyond comprehension. Hidden rooms, some no larger than closets, bore traces of blood and scratch marks, as if someone had fought desperately to escape. Gas pipes ran to sealed chambers, their valves rusted but functional. The basement was a chamber of nightmares, a dissecting table stained dark, vats of acid still bubbling, and a furnace filled with charred bones. The press swarmed, turning the castle into a macabre spectacle. Reporters described the death factory in lurid detail, their stories fueling public outrage. One room, dubbed the Vault of Death, was airtight, with gas jets controlled from Holmes' office. Another contained a trapdoor leading to a chute that dropped straight to the basement. Personal items littered the castle: rings, watches, a woman's hairpin, a child's shoe, each one a silent testament to a life snuffed out. The quicklime pit held fragments of human remains, too degraded to identify. Estimates of the body count varied wildly, from dozens to hundreds, as investigators struggled to piece together the truth. Holmes, now in a Philadelphia jail, remained defiant. He spun tales of innocence, claiming the castle was a legitimate business and the missing people had simply moved on. But Geyer's evidence was damning. Letters from families, forged by Holmes, were matched to his handwriting. Witnesses placed him with victims days before they vanished. A former accomplice, Marion Hedgepeth, turned on him, revealing Holmes' plan to fake Pittsville's death for insurance money, a plan that ended in real murder. The detective's meticulous work traced Holmes' movements across states, linking him to disappearances in St. Louis, Toronto, and beyond. The castle's horrors were not just physical. Investigators uncovered Holmes' financial schemes, which were as twisted as his murders. He had swindled creditors, sold the same furniture multiple times, and used aliases to secure loans he never repaid. Some victims, like Minnie Williams, had been lured by promises of marriage, only to have their inheritances stolen before their lives were taken. The castle was a machine of greed as much as death, its every room a tool for profit. Holmes had even sold skeletons to medical schools, turning his victims into commodities. Public fascination reached a fever pitch. Newspapers printed floor plans of the castle, speculating on its deadly mechanisms. Crowds gathered outside, some daring to sneak inside before police sealed it off. The stories of Holmes' charm, his ability to woo women, disarm creditors, and fool neighbors, made him a figure of both fear and intrigue. How could one man deceive so many? Women who had worked for him, like a surviving clerk named Clara, described his hypnotic presence, his ability to make you feel like the only person in the room. Yet, they also recalled his coldness, a flicker of cruelty in his eyes when he thought no one was watching. Geyer's investigation faced challenges. Many victims were transients, their identities lost to the castle's flames or acid. The lack of records from the World's Fair made it hard to track missing persons. Yet, the detective pressed on, interviewing families and piecing together timelines. He estimated Holmes had killed at least 27 people, though some claimed the number was far higher. The Pitzel children's deaths galvanized the case, turning public opinion against Holmes. His charm, once his greatest asset, now seemed monstrous, a mask for unimaginable evil. As the evidence mounted, Holmes began to crack. He offered partial confessions, admitting to fraud but denying murder. He claimed some victims had died accidentally, caught in his experiments. But the castle told a different story, one of calculated slaughter. The investigation was closing in, and Holmes' trial loomed. Chicago, once blind to his crimes, was now awake, demanding justice for the lives lost in the murder castle. In the spring of 1895, the nation's eyes turned to Philadelphia, where H. Holmes stood trial for the murder of Benjamin Pitzel. The murder castle, now infamous, loomed large in the public's imagination, its horrors splashed across newspaper headlines. The charming doctor, once a fixture of Chicago's Englewood, was now a caged monster, his piercing blue eyes meeting the gaze of a courtroom hungry for justice. Detective Frank Geyer's evidence had built an ironclad case, but Holmes was a master of deception, and he wasn't done fighting. The trial would be a spectacle, revealing the depths of his crimes and cementing his place as America's first serial killer. The courtroom was packed, the air thick with anticipation. Prosecutors laid out their case with chilling precision. Geyer testified about the Pitzel children, Alice, Nellie, and Howard, whose bodies were found in Toronto and Indiana, their deaths traced directly to Holmes. The insurance fraud scheme, meant to net $10,000, was exposed as a pretext for murder. Holmes had lured Pitzel to a rented house, killed him with chloroform, and burned the body to stage an accident. Witnesses described Holmes' calm demeanor as he collected the payout, even as Pitzel's wife, Carrie, begged for news of her children. Holmes took the stand in his own defense, a decision that stunned the court. His voice was steady, his manner polished, as he spun a tale of innocence. He claimed Pitzel had faked his death and run off, leaving Holmes to handle the insurance claim. The children, he said, were alive and well, sent to live with a relative. But his lies crumbled under cross-examination. Geyer produced letters, forged by Holmes, that promised Carrie her children were safe. Hotel records placed Holmes with the children days before their deaths. The jury watched, stone-faced, as his charm faltered, his story unraveling like a threadbare cloth. The murder castle became a central figure in the trial. Prosecutors presented sketches of its layout, hidden rooms, gas chambers, and the basement's gruesome tools. A Chicago police officer testified about the furnace, still clogged with ash and bone fragments. A chemist confirmed traces of human remains in the quicklime pit. Reporters in the courtroom scribbled furiously, their stories painting Holmes as a fiend who turned his hotel into a slaughterhouse. The public was horrified, yet fascinated, unable to look away from the man who had killed with such cold efficiency. Holmes' past was laid bare. Witnesses from his early years spoke of his scams in Michigan, his habit of disappearing when debts came due. Former lovers and employees, including a trembling Clara from the pharmacy, described his hypnotic charm and sudden cruelty. The names of the missing, Emmeline Sigrand, Minnie Williams, Julia Smythe, echoed through the courtroom, their absence a silent accusation. Prosecutors estimated Holmes had killed at least 27 people, though some speculated the number was closer to 200. The lack of bodies made an exact count impossible, but the castle's evidence spoke louder than Holmes' denials. The defense was a desperate scramble. Holmes, acting as his own attorney at times, tried to shift blame to others, accomplices, he claimed, who used the castle without his knowledge. He accused Geyer of planting evidence, a charge that fell flat against the detective's meticulous records. His composure slipped as the trial wore on, his voice rising in frustration. The jury saw through the act, their verdict forming long before deliberations began. On November 2, 1895, Holmes was found guilty of Benjamin Pittesell's murder. The judge sentenced him to death by hanging, his words heavy with contempt for the man before him. Holmes' reaction was chilling. He showed no remorse, only a flicker of defiance, as if he believed he could still talk his way out. In his cell, he began writing confessions, admitting to 27 murders but claiming some were accidents or suicides. He described the castle's mechanisms with a perverse pride, detailing how he gassed victims or dissolved them in acid. Yet, he contradicted himself, mixing truth with lies, leaving investigators unsure of the full toll. The confessions were published, feeding the public's morbid curiosity and cementing Holmes' infamy. The trial marked a turning point. It exposed the vulnerabilities of a rapidly growing America, where anonymity allowed predators like Holmes to thrive. Chicago, still reeling from the fair's glory, grappled with the stain of the castle. The case sparked calls for better policing, stricter oversight of boarding houses, and more accountability for missing persons. Holmes, once a shadow in the city, was now its darkest legend, a warning of what lurked beneath a charming smile. If you're gripped by the chilling justice of this case, hit subscribe and join us at the Crime O'Clock, where every case is a ticking mystery waiting to be solved. Holmes is condemned, but what legacy will his horrors leave behind? Stay with us to find out. On May 7, 1896, H. Holmes stood on the gallows in Philadelphia's Moyamensing prison, his final moments ticking away. The man who had turned a Chicago hotel into a chamber of horrors faced death with a strange calm, his blue eyes scanning the crowd as if searching for one last chance to charm his way out. The rope snapped taut, and America's first serial killer was gone, but the shadow of his murder castle lingered. Its legacy would haunt Chicago and the nation, reshaping how we view crime, trust, and the darkness that can hide behind a smile. The castle itself did not survive long after Holmes' execution. In August 1895, it was gutted by a mysterious fire, likely set to erase its secrets or collect insurance money. The blaze left only charred walls, but the stories of its horrors grew larger with time. Newspapers dubbed it the Murder Castle, a name that stuck, fueling tales of trapdoors, gas chambers, and a basement that swallowed lives. The site became a grim landmark, drawing curiosity seekers who whispered of ghosts and cursed ground. By 1938, the ruins were demolished, replaced by a post office, but the lot still carried an eerie weight. Holmes' crimes left a scar on Chicago. The city, once basking in the World's Fair's glory, was forced to confront its blind spots. The fair had brought millions, but also anonymity, letting predators like Holmes thrive unnoticed. His ability to charm victims, Emmeline Sigrand, Minnie Williams, the Pittesell family, exposed the dangers of unchecked trust. Families of the missing, some never identified, carried their grief in silence, their loved ones reduced to ash or rumors. Estimates of Holmes' victims range from 27 to over 200, a number blurred by his lies and the castle's efficiency at erasing evidence. The case reshaped law enforcement. Detective Frank Geyer's dog pursuit set a new standard for investigations, showing the power of persistence and evidence. His cross-country search for the Pittesell children became a model for tracking criminals across jurisdictions. Chicago's police, criticized for missing Holmes' crimes, pushed for better record-keeping and oversight of boarding houses. The nation began to see serial murder as a new kind of threat, one that required vigilance beyond the chaos of urban growth. Holmes' story also captivated the public, sparking a fascination with true crime that endures today. His confessions, published in newspapers, were devoured by readers, who marveled at his cold calculation. Books and articles dissected his psyche, painting him as a devil in human form. He became a cultural boogeyman, a symbol of evil hidden in plain sight. The Murder Castle, with its labyrinthine halls and deadly mechanisms, inspired countless stories, from novels to modern TV shows. It was a grim reminder that monsters don't always look the part. Yet, questions lingered. How had Holmes operated so long without suspicion? Why did so many ignore the castle's oddities, the smells, the vanishings, the furnace's endless smoke? Some blamed Chicago's frenetic pace, others the trust people placed in a charming doctor. Holmes exploited society's gaps, its faith in appearances, its failure to track the missing. His crimes forced a reckoning, urging cities to tighten their grip on a growing, transient world. The castle was gone, but its lessons were carved into history. Today, H. Holmes remains a figure of fascination and dread. His name surfaces in debates about evil, psychopathy, and the limits of human cruelty. The exact toll of his crimes may never be known, but the stories of his victims, those named and nameless, echo through time. The murder castle, though reduced to rubble, stands as a monument to the fragility of trust and the need to question what lies behind a locked door. What do you think really happened in those walls? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to the Crime O'Clock, because the next mystery might already be ticking.